Je m'appelle Sheila Sheila Conrad or Sheila Paizecki, recently married. So I am the regional representative for Region 6 for the rest of the year, and finishing out my term. And we're so happy to have you here for our second webinar, second of 2 Region 6 webinars. So thank you very much for taking an hour out of your busy lives to be here with us. Presenting, we have Manon Alarcrop and Audra Murfeld-Langston from both leaders of the Greater St. Louis chapter, and they will be presenting to you on French Beyond France. Feel free to ask questions in the chat if you'd like, but they are going to try to get through everything first and then save questions for the end. All right, so thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to Audra and Manon.
Yes, so thank you, Sheila. We'll mute everyone to prevent just background noise, and then we've saved some time at the end for questions and for a discussion. So we'll definitely have time to engage in that way. Okay. So just for logistics, if you want to use the chat, you can ask your questions in there so that you don't have to write them down in your notes and then forget about them. You can use the chat feature. There is a little screenshot here of where to find it on your Zoom app, and then this is also where I don't think I can annotate, but this is the second picture is where you can find your mute button if you're unfamiliar with Zoom. So that's what will enable you to talk at the end. Okay, so today we're going to talk about French Beyond French. And what we have started first is a little activity, little brain dumps to kind of see, and the word cloud to kind of see what you think about, to kind of evaluate what assumptions we have about French.
I stuck it in the chat for everyone.
Thank you.
So you can click on the link in the chat.
And it will take you to this page. And when you're in there, you can type what you think about when you think of French. Single words, you can type up to 40 characters. Oh, and I have to refresh if we want to be able to see what everyone is saying. And somebody, I'll type that in here, like gastronomie. So we've got the usual suspects, the baguette, the chateau, the croissant, the gastronomie, history, Algerian war history, the French-speaking world, I think I saw as well, top right, okay. Okay, so you'll see, I guess we'll do a little discussion to kind of follow up on these assumptions that we may have. And Audra, just stop me or add whenever. We're gonna go in small discussion rooms, breakout rooms, in groups of maybe 4 or 5. I think Audra is already sharing in the chat. Yes, thank you. Audra just shared in the chat a Google Doc, so click on the Google Doc, and then you'll see the questions that you'll be able to discuss in your small breakout rooms. You'll have about 5 minutes, and you can maybe get started by introducing yourselves to the members of your breakout rooms and discuss these, and then input any, in writing on the Google Docs, you can share your ideas, and then we'll have a little discussion. Okay, so Sheila, I'll let you add
It'll be
people.
just a minute. I'm working on the breakout room.
Yes. Yeah, it takes a little bit to put it together.
It might be helpful when you get into your breakout room to assign one person to be the note taker for the document, and then we'll be able to take a look at everything.
So you should have received an invitation to join. You just click join. Yes. Okay, it looks like everybody's in there. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna time it. And I'm going to close my email because I think everybody got a glimpse of my email when I went over there. I apologize for that.
Sheila, maybe we can pause the recording here. Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Great.
So there is maps. Lots of maps, it sounds like.
The frantic typing is happening.
And just to add to that, like inspirational quotes, either in French or in English. And then sometimes student projects.
To show off, yeah, to showcase what they're doing. Yeah. Oh, 1 more minute, okay. Oh, also, I don't think they can see the chat in there. It's okay. They probably see your countdown.
Okay, well, that's good.
We were just kicked out of our room, just so you know.
Okay.
Okay, so I think, okay. I am going to go back in there. So it sounds like, Sheila, I can see the list. It looks like everybody, yes, everybody's back, okay.
Hey, we're going too.
Whoops. Interestingly, a lot of the words in our word cloud were very French based, but it sounds like a lot of the decorations that everybody has involve flags and international or more international. So, whoops. Let me go back here. I don't think there was really enough time to talk about, I apologize for the slides. I don't think there was a lot of time in there to talk about how much, if you know, how much of what's in your classroom and how much of what you're teaching is French based as opposed to beyond the hexagon. And if you want to, you know, share, you know, a percentage quickly in the chat. I know in my classrooms, because of my training, we'll talk a little bit about that. And because I am from France, a lot of, I would say about probably 60%. I'm trying to change that, but 60% is probably French based.
I think it's interesting too, looking at the document, everything that people put in the document, there's a focus on geography. So lots of people with maps and flags. I'm wondering, and feel free to say something in the chat, do you have pictures of people? I see like number 9, posters and photos of France, particularly Paris. Are you using pictures of people, or are most of the photos that you have in your rooms of places? Okay, so we have some teachers discovery, monde francophone people. Anyone else?
Some of us may not have classrooms. I don't have a classroom.
Right. At the university that I'm at, I don't have my own classroom either. And during the breakout rooms, that's what I was kind of lamenting. Like, I would like to be able to have my own classroom to put all kinds of things up, and I just can't.
Mm-hmm. And Loren says in the chat that usually the images of people come up more in lessons, but not for decorating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. And then, yes, teaching remotely, right? that presents all kinds of other challenges.
Okay, let me go back to here. So first, we just want to briefly kind of discuss, you know, why incorporate French beyond France? And then a little bit later, we'll talk about how to do that. Okay. I apologize. Okay, here is, well, here is a few of the things that we have kind of identified as to why incorporate French beyond France. Not just because, well, because of the historical part and, you know, the history of colonization, the heritage of colonization, but also in terms of 21st century skills, the comparative aspect of, you know, comparing cultures is great for critical thinking skills and intercultural communication skills. It's definitely a professional asset. That's something that no matter what students specialize in can serve purposes for, can be useful on a resume or in an interview or just trying to, even for college applications. And for us, it's also a recruitment tool, right? So the students, well, so for in terms of professional assets, we know employers look for students who have language skills because, you know, it means they're dedicated students. It means they can learn. It tells them something about their study habits. But they also bring like a breadth and a depth of knowledge about various cultures, as well as communicative skills. At least we hope. And for us, in terms of recruiting, in terms of representation, it might be attractive for students to have, you know, to learn that, well, in French class, you learn about more than just French. You know, some students who may have French ancestry might be interested in French for that reason, but there's also students who may not have French ancestry who might be interested in learning about cultures, other French-speaking cultures, and people who may look like them or who may have the same origin as them beyond France. And then the cross-disciplinary interests involved in, you know, reaching out beyond just cultural factoids about France is great for college or employment. So I'm going to let Ogra take over now for, we're going to kind of take a look at some challenges that we may have, and then we'll get to how maybe sharing ideas about how to overcome these.
And one more point before we move to the next slide. If you haven't taken a look or you're not familiar with the 21st century skill map for world languages, I recommend taking a look. It addresses these issues that we're talking about, and it's part of the Partnership for the 21st Century, and it's been combined with ACTFL. There are all kinds of ideas for interpersonal, presentational, and what's the third one I'm missing? Interpersonal,
Interpretive?
Interpretive?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So there's kind of a map there for world language skills. What can we do in our language classes? And of course, culture is a huge component of what we teach, and it's going to tie in with the critical thinking skills, information literacy, all of these things that we want students to be able to develop no matter what they choose to do after they graduate high school or college. So the link for that is at the bottom of the screen. I know it's very small, but if you just Google P21 and ACTFL, you will come up with this 21st century skills map. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so one of the things that we wanted to touch briefly on today is challenges with the way that people and places are represented in textbooks. So this image is from a French 1 textbook, and just by looking at the picture, what year do you think the textbook was published? And if you'll write your answers in the chat, we can keep an eye on them that way. All right, 1950, 1960, 63, 65, 45, decades and decades and decades ago, 1850, yes. Okay, very, very old. What makes you, what are the parts of this image that make you guess that time period? All right, clothing, yeah, the look of the trains, the way that people are dressed, the race of the people. All right, next slide, please. So this is actually from Bien dit, French 1, and it's from 2013. And we might wonder, okay, well, surely there's some kind of context here in which this image would be presented, but not really. There's a tiny little paragraph above it saying that, you know, this is a poster by Danielle Landry. I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on for the tiny print. This is all there is to it right now. There's no other context. And then earlier in the book, you have a similar picture that we can't blame on a poster from the 1960s or 1950s. It's the same kind of image. Everything's been updated a little bit, except it's still all Caucasian people. There is no diversity whatsoever. So again, from 2013. Next slide, please, Manon.
Yes, here we go.
Elsewhere in the same book, so this is still Bien dit, and these are just a few examples. It's not only Bien dit, it's not just this textbook. So this is the vocabulary presentation for chapter 3, Mon ami est. And if you look at the pictures here, we see that on page 78, everyone is or seems to be Caucasian, perhaps Hispanic, but mostly Caucasian. We have one full photograph or where you can see the person's whole face on page 79 of a Black person. But nowhere on either of these pages does it tell you how to say that your hair is black, okay? So if you're a person of color, or if you're not a person of color but you have black hair, you don't even know how to describe yourself fully using the vocabulary that's presented in this textbook. So this is just one tiny little example or two tiny examples from one textbook about ways that representation is lacking in the materials. Next, please.
Really briefly, a slightly different question is, how do we teach culture? So talking about representation, not just giving the tools, the linguistic tools for our students to talk about themselves, regardless of, race, ability, gender, etc. But when we come to actually teaching culture, how do we do that? And this is an excerpt from a unit on the Francophone world in the textbook that we use at my school, which has a lot of great aspects, but this, in here you will notice that this is all the vocabulary that's on the screen right here is, this is all there is to talk about l'Afrique francophone. And then there's a little activity where students get to connect the names of capitals to the name of countries. So as you can see, it's mostly names of animals, and then names of, in the autre category, it's a lot of landscape elements, le paysage pretty much, and other things. So there is no really, it's kind of exoticizing, kind of more of a touristic gaze, and there's nothing much about the people or the traditions. First of all, because we probably would not be able to cover all of that in just one single unit, but there is not as much depth about the perspectives and the values of the people and the history of the people who may live in l'Afrique francophone. And oops, I apologize. So there is, those couple of examples just give us a little bit of insight about some of the issues that we may encounter when trying to incorporate French beyond France. So if we rely only on textbooks, then we are limited by the limitations of the textbooks. Then there is also our own backgrounds. Being French and having studied in mostly traditional programs, both in France and in the US, I did not really study anything other than French culture or French literature. Sometimes we have limitations with time. And sometimes it's a lack of training or professional development that's available to us to remove those barriers. Audra, do you want to add anything?
I will add, like Manon, most of my background is just pure France, French of France, French traditions, French literature. And so I think that we need to recognize that it takes great effort to retrain ourselves or to seek out professional development that will help us learn ourselves. And recognize that this is not something that, you know, you're gonna read one more book and you're gonna have it. It's a lifelong learning process, and to make these changes, we have to want to make them, and then we have to find the time to be able to educate ourselves, ask questions, and then be able to share that information with our students, and also let our students know that we are still learners ourselves. Just as, you know, we're continually learning. We speak 2 languages. Some of us speak more languages, but we're always going to be a second language learner in that other language. The same thing with the culture, the historical background, literature, all of these other elements that go into what we teach in our classes. We are continually learning, and I think it's important to let our students know that it's okay if you don't know something, and if we model that ourselves and say, well, let's just keep learning. Let's learn this together.
Right. And part of like one way to incorporate, one way to be less centered around France is precisely to put things into students' hands and ask them to just use resources and do little research projects that involve, you know, searching a country, a nation, or that is not France, that's of interest to them, and then to report to the classroom. And then somebody in the chat, Nadej, is mentioning funding. We may be limited in funding in terms of getting, you know, current books or more up-to-date books. And then there's also the issue of editors and publishers. You know, how willing are they to make changes as well? So I apologize, my cat is being a little bit loud. So now, how do we do it? How do we French beyond France? Well, we're gonna work on it together, and we're gonna give you another little Google Doc in which you can share your ideas. We're gonna put you in another breakout rooms. We'll have 2 questions for you to discuss. If your classroom is already very decentralized, and by that we mean, you know, incorporates activities and content that is not French-centered, French or France-based, what resources and strategies do you rely on? And I see that some people have already started sharing in the chat. And if you're willing to do that, but you don't really know where to start, like what obstacles are standing in the way?
And I've added the link in the chat to the Google Doc where you can share your ideas here. So Sheila, we're going to move to breakout rooms for another 5 minutes.
Perfect. I'm going to send people in their breakout rooms right now. The Zoom recording. Yep. Perfect.
Can you hear the cat?
Is it participate?
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Joyeux anniversaire, Eileen.
Joyeux anniversaire.
Bon anniversaire.
Rebonjour.
Okay. Alors,
I think we're still waiting for most people.
okay.
Now they're all back.
Okay. Okay. Good. So, and there's still some typing in there. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that we can all take a minute to look at it. But there's lots of great suggestions using different sources, news broadcasts, so authentic resources from different places, different communities, project-based or student projects based on Francophone communities, so sending the students out and doing some research. Using, yes, the En plus je parle français campaign, so changing the type of visuals that we use in our classrooms to decorate. There is, and I think I'm just going to take a quick look at, okay, so what obstacles are standing in the way? Kind of this, it sounds, being afraid of making cultural gaffes. So maybe if you have limited knowledge of a culture, you don't want to say something that's incorrect or that maybe could be offensive, even if your intentions are good. I think part of this is it's important to model kind of a growth mindset and then, a lifelong learner mindset. It's uncomfortable, but, students need to know that we are also learning and always training and learning more about various countries and various cultures. There is also a useful resource that I'm sure you are quite familiar with, but when teaching about culture, the specific topic of culture, using the 3 Ps of cultures. And this is part of the ACTFL standards for teaching cultures, relating, not just remaining at the level of products or practices, but diving a little bit more into the perspectives, meaning if you think of culture as kind of an iceberg, and on top you have, language, art, dress, food, and then under the waterline you have, practices, beliefs and values, maybe some history too, connecting what's above the waterline to the perspectives and the beliefs, or giving students the skills to try and get to that. So that means really trying to develop cultural competence and intercultural mindset or communicative skills. And then there is also, to kind of add to what you were saying in the Google Doc, there is a lot of resources that I'm going to let Audra take over, unless you want to add something to the product practices and perspectives.
We can come back to this maybe, but I'll just go ahead with the other examples. That's fine.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So for the next little bit here, I just want to go over some of the resources that AATF already has for all of us, and these are fantastic. If you go onto FrenchTeachers.org, there is a whole page just with resources, and the YouTube channel, Wakelet, Pinterest, all of these are listed on there, and they are full of resources that we can use. And a lot of the credit goes to Catherine Usna, who has put a lot of these materials together. I'm sure that there are other people who have worked on this as well, but her name is kind of the one that keeps popping up in all of these circles. And she's really curated a lot of great stuff for us here. I'm sure that some of these you might already be familiar with, so I've just selected a couple of them that maybe you're less familiar with or that you don't know about at all. Manon, can you please go to the next slide? So first, we will take a look at the Wakelet. So if you go to if you click on the link for AATF Wakelet, this is the page that's going to come up. And you can keep scrolling down the page. I've, of course, just done a screenshot here. And I just have given you an example. If you click on Réseaux sociaux and you follow that arrow, what comes up is a curated list, 1 to 21 there, of different social networks, social media that you can follow if you don't know where to start. Where do I start to find you know, a Twitter feed for Francophone governments? Where do I start to find a list of restaurants that might have an Instagram page? They are all curated here. Next, please. So these are just some examples, still from the same Réseaux sociaux francophones qui suivent. And I just happened to select all Twitter accounts here. So there's one from the Gouvernement du Québec, UNESCO en français, RFI Afrique, and then Les Délices de Milly, which I think was in Cameroon. So if you're not a Twitter person, if you don't tweet, if you don't have an account, it doesn't matter. You can still click on the links to get to these Twitter feeds, and then you can scroll through and find something that might be interesting for you and your students. If your students don't use these accounts or you can't get to them through your school, it's still okay. If you can get there and take some screenshots of some tweets, and I'll show you some examples of those in just a bit, to just take little snippets to use in class. This can be as small of a project as you want it to be, or as big of a project as you want it to be. Maybe you want students to compare tweets from 2 different news sources in French, or 2 different restaurants from French-speaking countries, or 2 different celebrities who speak French. Maybe you want them to just focus on one tweet. There are lots of things that you can do with this. Next, please. The other resource that I'm not sure I was not familiar with this actually, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, but I'm just gonna say Digo Bookmarks. This is a huge list of different bookmarks to different websites, and that mostly link to articles about the Francophone world. And I know it's very tiny on there, but I did a sample search for Senegal, and these are all different articles that came up, links to articles. Next slide, please. And to give you an example, the arrow that popped up is, oops, back please, Mano. Yeah. Oh, okay, forward 1.
One more, sorry.
One more.
Back or forward?
Forward.
I apologize. Yes.
Okay, that's all right. Teamwork. So I clicked on one of the links from that Digo bookmark, and this brought me to the France Culture page about Senegal. So on this page, there are all kinds of articles that are specifically about Senegal. Then I clicked on the top article, and it brought me to an article about, I'm sorry, again, it's small, and I don't have my other glasses on, Djibril Diop Mambéty. And when you click on this, there is an audio resource, and then there's also a text resource. So it's just, you know, you don't have to do a ton of Google searches to find all these resources. They're all curated here, and the things that are on these lists are, you don't have to search so much for stuff that's going to be applicable to your class, right? You don't have to sort through, whoa, this is really inappropriate, I can't use this. It's all right here. And with something like this, again, you can pick and choose. Do you want your students to listen to part of this? Do you want to play part of it in class? Do you want them to read the text? Do you want them to do both? There are so many different things that you can do with this. And this resource, this Digo Bookmarks, is just fantastic. Next slide, please, Manon. Just to give you one more example from the same source. So Digo Bookmarks, this time I did a search for Tahiti. Some of the articles that came up were about the environment, plastic bags, foods, recipes, all centered on Tahiti, Black Friday, legends of Tahiti, traditions, and then there was even stuff about school cafeterias and cuisine. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel. All of these resources are on that page for you. Next, please, Manon. All right, what can you do with all of these resources? You had started mentioning some of these ideas in the Google Doc. So I'm not going to go into specific detail on all of these. I think someone had mentioned IPAs, group activities. You can have students do individual activities, relate what you do to what the students are already interested in. They get a lot more engaged that way, I found. But also in the essence of, or in the spirit of letting go of our control on the classroom, ask students what they want to do. If there is a social media resource that they use a lot, what do they think would be interesting to do with that in class? Or have them design some activities. Next, Manon. I am not going to read all of these. I'll give you kind of a chance to look it over here, but these are just some examples of things that you could do with your class. If you're looking at a Twitter account, how often does this account post, right? So you can incorporate as simple of French as you want it to be or as complicated. Something like, how often does this person post? You can just ask the students, you know, souvent, rarement, jamais, and all they need to do is look at the date. Or you can get more complicated from there with screenshots that you might choose to use. Next, please, Manon.
And this is also great for interpersonal writing, for example, or a response to an interpretive activity, and then ask students to respond to the post. Oops.
All right, so these are just a few examples, and this is from the Twitter feed of Corneille, a Québécois singer. And so the samples that I chose here, I chose specifically because they're kind of in franglais, right? The first one, all he did is post a picture from a forward from a book, and you can't zoom in on the picture here, but it's a forward that talks about the books 1984 and Brave New World, and the kind of the current, in the context of our current world situation, social media, Big Brother, things like that. But the interesting thing is, in response, he just put an emoji here. So what does that mean? What do students think that how he interprets the text that he posted in the photo here? The next one on the top right corner there, que veut dire le mot succès chez vous? So here's a celebrity who's posing a question. Students could respond to this question. They don't have to respond directly to Corneille, but they can respond within the classroom. How would you define success? And then finally, the last one here, and this is all very timely with Twitter as well. En regardant l'épisode at Joe Rogan, at Kanye West, m'a fait réaliser qu'on parle de toutes sortes de diversité, mais pas assez de la neurodiversité, bipolarité, notwithstanding, dude's brain's just different, needs to be embraced, celebrated, and loved instead of marginalized. So in the middle of the tweet, he switches to English. And I thought this was a really nice instance of just bilingualism. What does it mean to be bilingual today? This is a celebrity switching languages in the middle of his tweet. And also, you know, as this was about the election, and so not too polarizing with Kanye West here, perhaps, but just bringing in really, really current events. Next, please, Manon.
Yes, and in terms of just with regard to the Corneille example, this could be an opportunity to bring up like linguistic diversity too, because he's bilingual, but he speaks other languages. I don't know the other specific languages he speaks, but being from Rwanda, he probably speaks at least one other language. And these are things that our students like. They probably, a lot of them are on Twitter, so it's a great way to meet them where they are. So kind of like our concluding thoughts before we open up the floor for discussion is we need to really be mindful and try to normalize non-French centered materials rather than thinking of it as, you know, France and Francophone countries, you know, just Francophone communities or Francophone, embracing it as just a group of communities where people speak French, and normalize it by really supplementing the textbooks as often as we can, so we're not limited by them, and just using all sorts of authentic materials from various sources. Putting it into students' hands and sending them out to do exploratory activities, or trying to, use the same type of communication media that they use so that things are meaningful to them. So incorporating social media. And as Audra was saying, social media is also really great for, in terms both of the language and the culture, it's all very current. So it's exactly what things are happening now. So it's going to be relevant and meaningful for the students. So we're going to open the floor for discussion. Here we have a little bit more than 10 minutes for a discussion and Q&A. Like, what other principles or ideas did you go by when you're designing your activities? There's a lot of resources that are being posted in the chat, so we will collect them and maybe add them to a Google Doc later on to share, if maybe we want to do that. So what other principles and ideas do you go by when you design those activities? What activities really work? What resources do you use? And so we'll leave the floor open, and you can just jump in either by unmuting yourself. So you have to click on the little red mic on your screen, or just typing in the chat.
I'm wondering about the cultural perspectives, that kind of being the most sophisticated of the cultural representations. What kinds of activities do you all do that help to promote that?
So promoting as in going beyond products and practices into the perspectives.
Exactly.
Well, I'm happy to share something that I do, but I don't want to claim the floor too much. But when I teach about social, yes, so when I teach about social sécurité sociale and healthcare, for example, we watch a little video from, I think, French 24 that my colleague shared with me, and that talks about the history and the specificities. It's very descriptive. And then we have a discussion where I ask them specific questions in English, actually, about values. What does it tell us about, the state? And, what does it tell us about what values the French prioritize? And can you go, as opposed to the values that Americans prioritize? And in that case, it's very French-centered, because I don't know much about other systems. But to try and get them to, connect that to maybe the French motto, the liberté, égalité, fraternité, the idea of solidarity and how it manifests in different contexts.
I have a resource that I'd like to share. It's Hofstede Insights. And it's a website where you can compare countries, and it compares them with 6 different criteria, such as long-term orientation, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, and these different things that are behind the scenes. And you can compare different countries. I know some of the Francophone countries on there are Senegal, Burkina Faso, Morocco, Vietnam, Belgium, Switzerland. And so that's been a good resource for me to learn about countries that I haven't been to personally, and some of the value systems that other researchers have gone in and done the work to learn about. So I'll also type it in the chat so that people can find it.
One of the things I find interesting as well, I'm thinking of your question, and then also I'm looking at the chat with the big C and little c. Depending on who our students are, sometimes they don't realize that there are these same cultural differences in the United States from family to family, and not even, without even taking into account people who are speaking different languages at home, but people who might just speak the same language, but they're from a different part of the country, and the traditions and values and pronunciation of words is different from region to region. And students don't always necessarily know that when they walk into our classroom. So getting them to think about, yes, ask them to have a conversation at home about their values and priorities. And they might be very different from the family down the street. But so getting them to understand kind of the individual level, and then moving up to, okay, how might this be really different if you're talking to someone from a completely different culture?
And I also, I've also, to add to that, I've also used a lot of kind of concepts and perspectives from intercultural communication studies. And sometimes I have to do it in English, but just to kind of help students, give them some tools to think about culture as a concept, as a thing. So I'm sharing a reference in the chat.
Hey everybody, Nadej over here. One thing that I've taken advantage of is my French-speaking community. I live in Columbia, Missouri, so I don't know if it's applicable to everybody, but you may live in a city where there might be a little hubbub of other French speakers. Pre-COVID, they could be invited to my classroom to talk to my students, cook with my students, but even now with COVID, certainly Zooming with people. I was just reading an article about someone who's making really cool design bonbon in the Midwest, and I'm like, okay, come talk to my students about it. So sometimes the people around you is really helpful. The other thing we're tapping into is the seal of biliteracy. I'm not sure it's applicable to other states, but for the state of Missouri, it's really helpful. Now I can really think about how to matriculate my students. So if you're in French 1, what should I help you do from 2, 3 to 4 so you can be eligible to have the seal of biliteracy, which is then great for recruiting, professional opportunities, and so on. So if our students have something to look forward to and to add and process each year, that seems to be a little helpful.
I'm glad you mentioned the seal of biliteracy too, Nadej, because this is approved in almost every state now, or in the process of being approved, except for just a handful, maybe 2 states, something like that. And this is something that we need to be aware of from, you know, K to 12 all the way up through higher education, because the students who come out of high school with a seal of biliteracy, we want them to continue on in when they get to college, if they're going to continue their studies. And so we all need to understand what that is and how we can help students achieve it.
Another thing to consider is also to just to maybe re-envision, to kind of build on what Nadej was saying, is we don't need to pair up students with people who are necessarily entirely native and fluent speakers, but if they're people who have a legit, you know, kind of a like real life experience with the French language, students are still going to learn from it. So, you know, making them talk or listen or interact with people who may be refugees and have French as their lingua franca as opposed to their first or second language, they're still going to learn from that, and it's still going to be like an authentic experience for the students with people, because that's a real use of the language too. And I know locally in St. Louis there is some there may be, or where you are, there may be some associations that could pair you up with recent immigrants or recent refugees, for example. And somebody in the chat is also mentioning jumelage, which I don't know how to translate in English, but finding schools. Now that everybody's used to being remote, finding schools overseas to connect with students.
Any other suggestions or things that you're already doing? Rotary, yes. Do we, or so especially for those of you who are teaching high school or middle school, do you encourage your students to do Rotary programs? Do you have students that are asking you about opportunities to go abroad?
Yeah, my school does, and I actually had a student come speak to them. I think it's a bit of a challenge being in the Midwest. You know, some of our students don't have a passport, so we have to first sort of broaden the horizon to get the passport, then to leave the country. But it's really interesting that one or two might go a year.
Yeah, more ideas here. Invite TAPIF and Peace Corps. And this goes back to what Nadej was saying about inviting people who are already in the community. If, you know, around where I live here, I'm kind of in the middle of the state of Missouri. We are the biggest town around, and we've only got about 20,000 people. But, you know, there are companies that come to my campus who are trying to recruit students. And so at the higher education level, if you have industry partners who maybe even they don't even speak the language, but they work for a branch of the company and they can come in and talk to your students, that might be another idea. Anything else? Guest speakers from community college. Oh, okay, then there's a whole bank of volunteers from former Peace Corps. Concordia Language Village, TAPIF. Yeah. Someone mentioned just the difficulty about being in the Midwest and trying to get students to broaden their horizons a bit as well. And I've certainly run into this in the middle of Missouri. I've got students who've never left the state before, so leaving the country is a huge step for them. But if we can get them to hear from people who have been abroad and who've had these great experiences and can tell them about it, while also acknowledging sometimes this is really challenging too, right? I think it's a great way to bring these other cultural elements into the class.
I worked as a volunteer in Cambodia for many years as a teacher, and I had my students here in Wisconsin pair up with my students in Cambodia to tutor English. Unfortunately, French really isn't very spoken anywhere in Southeast Asia these days. So English is the new lingua franca, but it was a great way for my students to learn about Cambodia. And one of them later applied to become a country coordinator and to go teach in Cambodia. And I've done similar things in Vietnam, where I lived growing up, and I guess in my youth. And I worked with one of the Catholic dioceses in Saigon, in Ho Chi Minh City. And we have several sisters who come here for ESL. And I've tried to involve them in my language classes to talk about Vietnam. And they find that very interesting. We're a Catholic university, and the fact that there's so many Catholics in Vietnam is very new to them. And they are able to learn a lot from talking to the sisters. It's really cool. So thank you. This has been very interesting. I have to go back and try to compute my final grades. They're due Monday. Bummer.
I think, yes, so I think we're all in this kind of like final stretch, almost final stretch of, so thank you for, if you have more things, we can keep the conversation going for a little bit, but thank you for attending on a busy Saturday afternoon at the very end of a crazy semester. We are very much open to any suggestions, any needs that you have that you would like us to address. So feel free to email us. I'm going to put our email addresses in the chat. Or Audra, I'll let you put your email address in there because I can't remember it. Thank you, Audra.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. It's nice to see you and hear from you.
Happy holidays to all as well. Hope your families stay safe and well.
I ask a question? Do any of you know of a French resource in French that would be the equivalent of like the CIA fact book that just has basic information about, you know, geographical things, the economy, that kind of thing in French?
Not at the top of my head, but it sounds like it would be very useful.
I mean, CIA fact book is great, but then you have to translate it all and it would just
I
be.
use French Wikipedia for some things. I don't know how accurate it is, but I do use it.
Okay.
I think Wikipedia is increasingly reliable,
Right.
thanks
And
to.
And
Is
then one, I'm sorry, what?
something called, is it SOFRA? Is that the polling? ESSO? I'm gonna Google this really quickly. I might be making
I think you're right for polling, so to get a kind of an idea of the demographics and things like that.
Yes,
That's a really good point.
I'll try to find the website here, but there's something that, you know, they put out a lot of statistical data, which might be interesting for use in class. TNS Sofra, a marketing research firm. So it's not exactly the same thing as the fact book.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
if you're looking for some basic like country facts, I've done small country projects with my ones like pretty early on. And with Wikipedia, there is that sidebar on most of the articles that has like just that very basic information, not even in sentence form. And it's very easy to use, especially for low proficiency speakers.
Yeah. And then anybody else have any good references for like the various distinctions between a dom tom and protectorat and just the various forms of government and French influence in different countries? I'm just looking, I just don't have a good concept of how it all fits together politically and otherwise.
I don't have anything coming to mind off the top of my head. And
I have
end up having to look up like, wait, was this, what is the status of this place right now, right? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, the first thing, because I do have to check, because I always forget the difference between territoire d'outre-mer and département d'outre-mer.
Thank you.
Exactly. But so I often have to check that on Wikipedia in class, just to
Okay.
clarify the difference, like what's a territoire, what's a dom-tom. But
So maybe I don't have to worry too much about that technicality with 8th graders.
I think
Probably.
there are 5 départements. There's La Réunion, and then there's La Mayotte,
Martinique. Oui.
Martinique.
Martinique, La Guyane, and then Guadeloupe. Those are the only 5.
Only 5, okay.
And I don't know exactly what the implication is for the difference between a territoire versus département in terms of.
I think a département is just like a regular state. It's, I don't know. I think I lived in La Réunion a little bit, so. But, yeah.
Great,
I don't
thank
know,
you
but
very
does
much.
Alliance Française have a good resource? Any Alliance Française might. And I know that if you delve into the Apprendre TV, there's quite a good, there are a bunch of sources just exploring the different folders, and they may have something too on Apprendre TV.